I help guide people to find their rhythm. As a little girl, I watched my mother struggle with her mental health. I watched her put herself last. I watched her stop believing in herself. I watched her never finish her education, never care for her own body, and never build a life that she wanted. And it was so easy to recognize those patterns in someone else. It was much harder to see them when I lost my rhythm and those same qualities became my own. The scale tipped past 300 pounds. Most people would assume that was the day I decided to lose weight. It wasn't. It was the day I realized I had become my mother. And today, my body is healthier than it's been in years. But my body is no longer the only part of my life that's asking for healing. Healing isn't a finish line. Every time we become aware of something new, life asks something different of us. Our rhythm is constantly changing based on what's asking for our attention. And that's why I don't believe mental health is only about mental illness, depression, bipolar, suicidal thoughts, anything with a stigma. I believe it's how we live, not merely a diagnosis that we receive. There were periods in my life when I was deeply depressed, and when I knew I needed help, I genuinely tried to find it. But finding help was so difficult. Some therapists never returned my calls. Some weren't accepting new patients. Some seemed overwhelmed themselves. And others may have been qualified on paper, but I didn't feel that they understood the kind of healing that I was reaching for. I received diagnoses. A therapist even gave me a clinical measure of how severe my PTSD was. I could already feel my pain. Having some measure of it did nothing to help me understand how to live beyond it. And I knew I was hurting. That's why I was there. I needed someone to help me understand what had happened to me. How had I learned to survive and why those same survival strategies were now keeping me from living. I needed care that made room for my body, my mind, my spirit, my history, and the life I'm still trying to create. And I could not find the help I so desperately needed. For years, I thought I was moving toward the life I was meant to create. I built a career. I earned my education. I bought a home. I raised my son. From the outside, I was doing everything I was supposed to do. But those accomplishments weren't telling the entire story of my development. I was building a life while quietly drifting away from myself, and I didn't even realize it. I spent years believing healing meant becoming a better version of myself. Now I believe healing is remembering who you are before survival convinced you to become someone else. I didn't need another self-help book. I didn't need another person to tell me what was wrong with me. I needed a map. I needed a way to recognize where I was, understand what that phase of my life was asking of me, and respond without treating myself as a problem to be fixed. When I couldn't find that map, I began searching for another way. One night I was sitting outside, feeling deeply depressed and completely alone, I first reminded myself that God was with me. But then my thoughts turned toward the moon. I couldn't see her. She was in her dark phase, but I knew she was there. And in that moment, it was just me, God, and the moon. And I began wondering what part of me was hidden in the dark. And then I began to understand that even when we cannot see a way forward, it doesn't mean that the path has disappeared. And we have had a map all along. The moon gives us that map. And that realization eventually turned nature into the foundation of the Wild Moon Healing Framework and the reason Wild Moon Healers exists. The lunar phases help us recognize where we are. The seasons teach us how to move through that phase. The elements reveal what may be missing from the conditions surrounding us. And the zodiac reflects the different kinds of healing we may need along the way. This isn't astrology, but together they give us a way to understand our healing without reducing ourselves to a diagnosis or treating ourselves like something broken. Wild Moon Healers was never created to replace therapy or clinical mental health care. It grew from my search for something I had not been able to find within those systems. A whole person approach that could hold my mind, my body, my spirit, my nature, and the complexity of becoming. I didn't create Wild Moon Healers because I'd mastered healing. I created it because I needed a map. And as I learned to read that map for myself, I realized I could help others read it too.